The road was not broken. It was not swallowed by earth or rock. It simply, utterly, and quietly relinquished its claim on existence. The traveler's foot met the ground, and the sharp, defined line of the path yielded entirely to a surrounding silence. A silence that was not empty, but profoundly saturated, heavy with the unmoving weight of unseen deep time. The traveler had been walking for an interval that had ceased to be measurable, a long, slow, meditative drifting beneath a sky that gave no guidance, no comfort of the moon, no pinprick of star, only the deep, vast suggestion of a blackness so immense it was utterly indifferent to the small affairs of the earth. And then the world began, slowly, to change its very material. It dissolved not with violence or speed, but with the slow, inevitable, profound grace of geological eons, softening into a substance of deep, soft, pervasive gray. This was the mist. It was thick, heavier than air, clinging insistently to the weave of the traveler's heavy cloak, settling damply, softly on the exposed skin, and whispering coolly, continuously, against the slow, even rhythm of the breath. It was the color of old, forgotten silver, tarnished by countless years, and it felt precisely like the quiet, long-held essential space between one deep, slow heartbeat and the next. It was cold, yet it contained no threat of sharp frost, only the profound, sheltering promise of an absolute, enduring, and unbroken stillness. The mist was everything, and it demanded nothing. The traveler's pace, already slow, already deeply meditative, became even more deliberate, more measured. There was no need to consult an imaginary timepiece, no compulsion to quicken the stride, no fear of being lost, for the concepts of urgency or clear direction were trivial things, belonging only to the world of sharp edges and restless daylight. Here, within the deep, humid breath of the mist, there was only the present moment, vast, slow, and eternally accepting. One could not be lost when there was nowhere else to go. One could not be late when time itself had settled to a halt. Each slow footstep, which might have once produced a crisp, separate sound on dry gravel, now landed upon a surface that absorbed all noise. The ground was earth, profoundly, anciently, and repeatedly trod, now softened and entirely saturated by the continuous, patient embrace of the fog. The air grew dense, almost tactile, profoundly humid, and it began, finally, to carry an aroma unlike anything found in the fleeting world. It was the scent of the deepest earth, wet, patient, and cool. The profound, enduring scent of stones that had been covered so long they had forgotten the sun entirely, given over completely to the night. And beneath it all, a constant whisper of woodsmoke, impossibly, unimaginably old, that had lost every hint of burning, raging fire, retaining only the deep, comforting, settled memory of enduring warmth and quiet, necessary shelter. Ahead, the world was a continuous, mutable canvas of shifting monochrome. Nothing was immediately clear, but slowly, with the deep, patient constancy of geological formation, certain forms began to assert themselves. They did not appear with any startling suddenness, but rather coalesced from the formless gray, like half-forgotten memories, slowly, quietly, surely returning to a restful, accepting mind. The transformation was gentle, quiet, and profound. First came the low, broad-shouldered presence of the stones. They were not stacked or piled in any hasty construction, but seemed utterly and completely settled, sunk deep into the earth, their weight and sheer existence undeniable. They were the foundation of the stillness. Then the definite, heavy lines of a low wall, wet, darkly reflective, built of smooth river stones, stones worn and polished by the continuous, slow, patient flow of time itself. The mist did not obscure these stones. It loved them, clung to them, embraced them, softening their sharp edges until they felt less like structures and more like ancient, organic sleeping things, enduring and breathing slowly beneath the gray. The traveler passed an invisible, silent threshold and was simply in the place. It was not a grand or sudden arrival, only the quiet, gentle recognition that the endless, formless mist was now willingly holding specific, enduring objects, granting them a brief, temporary, sheltered solidity for the duration of the long night. The traveler felt a profound, soft sense of belonging, a quiet inevitability. It was a rhythmic, almost metallic clink, low, resonant, and indistinct, like a gate latch being gently teased by an air so slow it barely moved, or perhaps a tiny, unseen stream seeking its slow, constant way between stones. It was a sound of gentle, enduring permanence, a quiet acknowledgement of the world's underlying, slow rhythm. And then the soft, dull, unhurried glow of light. This light was not piercing, not urgent, not a sharp yellow that cut violently through the fog. This light was a deeply bruised, soft orange, the quiet color of a distant ember, radiating from a small lantern placed low beside a massive, dark, heavy wooden door. The thick glass of the lantern was filmed with the night's relentless moisture, blurring the light until it had an almost physical, tactile presence, like gently rubbing a piece of warm, thick, old velvet between the fingers. This light made no attempt to fight the mist. It offered no resistance. It only proved in the gentlest possible way that something lived, sheltered, and endured within the slow, patient tide of the gray. It was a warmth that did not dissipate the fog, but harmonized with it. The narrow path the traveler followed was not paved with hard, demanding cobbles, but was merely well-trod earth, smoothed and deepened by the passage of countless unhurried feet over countless quiet nights. On either side stood the low-slung, incredibly substantial cottages. They did not appear to be built. They seemed to be settled, designed solely to endure eons of damp, silence, and the patient weight of the night. Their roofs were heavy, dark slate, sinking low. Their windows were small, deep-set, and irregularly shaped, like the quiet, hooded, deep-set eyes of ancient, patient beings, glowing faintly, always softly from within. There was no haste in the architecture, no pretense of decoration, only the deep, certain, quiet knowledge of how to provide absolute, silent shelter against the endless, enveloping night. The village was a place of soft resignation and profound endurance. The traveler moved, one slow, deliberate, measured step after another, observing the windows with unhurried attention. Inside, figures moved, their forms doubly blurred, first by the dense, clinging mist outside, and second by the old, uneven, handmade glass within the panes. They were engaged in the slow, continuous, fluid motions of people who knew their tasks and had all the time in the world to complete them. A hand lifted, infinitely slow, tracing a continuous line. A shoulder bent with an unhurried, graceful inevitability. A shadow stretched long and then gently, softly, contracted across a low ceiling. These figures were not rushing to finish anything. They were only engaged in the profound, simple, gentle, quiet act of being and enduring, moment after slow moment. Their lives were a continuous drift. There was no sound of conversation, no sudden burst of laughter, no sharp, jarring bark of a dog, no abrupt, demanding cry of a child. The air was filled instead with a dense, resonant silence, a deep, rich quiet, broken only by the recurring silvery sound, a single wind chime perhaps, or a heavy bell in a tower unseen, swaying with such gentle slowness that it seemed more like an echo of a sound that had rung long, long ago in a forgotten time than an actual noise happening in the present moment. It was a sound that reassured the quiet dark of its enduring existence.
The scent of wood smoke grew marginally stronger, marginally clearer, as the traveler approached a doorway that stood slightly, casually ajar. The wood was dark, almost black with age and moisture, and felt cool and profoundly damp under the fingertips, worn smooth with the constant friction of quiet centuries, like a river stone polished by the endless, low flow of water. A sliver of warm, earthy air escaped the opening, bringing with it a clearer smell of damp, heavy wool and the deeply comforting, low heat of a banked hearth fire. The traveler paused by the open doorway. The open door was not an invitation, nor was it a challenge, nor was it a question demanding an answer. It was simply the way the door was, a natural space, unbarred, accepting, existing in the state of soft, unquestioning welcome. Inside, the light was dimmer still, a perpetual twilight, sustained only by the dying red firelight. An old woman sat on a low wooden stool near the hearth. She was entirely still, her hands resting patiently in her lap, watching the red-gray embers with an endless, unhurried patience that transcended any sense of boredom or immediate focus. Her clothing was simple, heavy, undyed wool, the deep, resting color of wet moss and undisturbed, quiet earth. The traveler stood in the doorway for a long, immeasurable moment, the mist silently pooling and swirling around their feet, the cool night air mixing and mingling with the dense, still warmth of the room. This was the place where the outside stillness met the inner quiet, where the dark was invited in but kept at bay. Finally, the woman moved. She shifted her head with the same slow, inevitable motion of a heavy celestial body turning on its axis, a motion requiring deep time. Her eyes, shadowed and deep, regarded the traveler. There was no flicker of surprise in them, no question that needed a spoken answer, and absolutely no fear or alarm. Only the quiet, profound recognition that everything in the village belonged exactly where it was meant to be, held perfectly in the slow, patient tide of the night. She lifted one hand, a slow, gentle gesture that required no effort, and pointed not directly at the traveler, but at a space on the smooth, worn wooden floor near the fire. It was a gesture of simple, unthinking acceptance, requiring no explanation, no verbal thanks, and certainly no apology for intrusion. The space was for resting. The traveler stepped across the threshold. The sound of the outside world was instantly muffled, drawn into the dense, absorbent stone of the walls. The air within was heavy, perfectly still and dry. The damp, absorbent wool of the woman's coat seemed to have drawn all excess moisture from the room. A low, aged wooden bench sat against the far wall. The traveler walked to it and settled down with slow, deliberate ease, leaning back against the cool, smooth stone of the inner wall. The woman returned her gaze to the fire, and the long, deep, patient silence resumed its soft, pervasive reign. There was no need to speak, no urgency to know names or origins or purpose. To be here, resting in the quiet dark, was enough. To breathe deeply, slowly, evenly, was the only activity required, the only necessary function of this moment. The low, deep, collective breathing of the entire village seemed to settle around them, a single, continuous, hushed exhalation of profound, quiet contentment. Hours passed in this unhurried, gentle, quiet way. The faint light outside the small, deep window did not change, held utterly constant by the patient, enduring thickness of the enveloping mist. The village existed outside the arc of the sun, sheltered entirely and absolutely within the deep, quiet necessity of the night. Sleep felt near, heavy and familiar, a soft, generous blanket offered without condition or expectation, simply existing as the next inevitable state. The subtle scent of wet earth and ancient smoke was a continuous lullaby without melody, a rhythm without sharp sound. There was no thought of morning's return, no thought of where the traveler had originally come from, and no curiosity about where this village went when the sun finally strained its way through the relentless mist. These were concerns for a world that felt urgent, sharp, and hurried. This place, now, was only for the deepest, most quiet, most essential rest. The traveler opened their eyes to the profound silence and slowly, gradually, rose from the bench, not with a sudden, restless decision, but with the quiet, gradual shift of the tide that draws away from the shore. The night was deepening, and the village was settling into its most profound stillness, preparing for its disappearance. It was time for the quiet cessation of movement, the gentle surrender to the inevitable fading. The long watch was ending. The traveler moved back toward the open door. The old woman did not stir, held perfectly in her quiet sleep. Stepping back into the narrow, yielding path, the cool, humid air touched the traveler's face, a silent, soft farewell, a final blessing of the quiet darkness. The light from the other windows was now almost completely imperceptible, just the faintest suggestion of warmth behind the blurred glass, like a quickly vanishing memory of fire that was never really there. The mist was heavier now, thicker than it had been upon arrival, like a continuous, patient stream of silk pouring down from the dark, unreadable sky. The stone cottages were already beginning to lose their hard, definite edges, becoming rounded, softer, merging back into the fluid gray from which they had been drawn. They were not being destroyed. They were merely being quietly released from form, returning to the ancient, quiet substance of the night. One last sound lingered, fading softly into the dense air, that distant, silvery chime, a sound that existed only on the very edge of hearing, a final, calming note, a quiet punctuation mark before the silence took everything back into its complete, safe embrace. The traveler continued to walk, not with the intention of leaving the village, but simply through the slow, inevitable fading of it. The earth path softened beneath the feet, the stone walls blurred into featureless gray mounds, the comforting scent of ancient smoke dissolved into only the cool, pure smell of wet night air. The shapes were retreating, pulling their physical presence inward, becoming only the idea of a cottage, the ghost of a lamplight. Soon there was only the mist again, deep, soft, and all-consuming. The world was returned to its essential, formless state, a quiet, humid void. The village was gone, not as a loss, but as a completed, necessary rest. It had offered its shelter,
shared its immense silence, and then dissolved as quietly as a breath on glass. The traveler was walking now in the deep, smooth velvet of the night, alone but not lonely, rested but not quite awake.
The world was dark, vast, and utterly silent, holding no threats, demanding no answers. The pace of the steps slowed until they were barely discernible, the rhythm becoming long, even, and deeply familiar, like a slowing pendulum. There was nothing left to see, nothing left to hear, nothing left to hold on to. Only the mist and the profound, certain knowledge that the night was a vast, quiet shelter, and that now it was finally time to close the eyes and finally, gently, belong entirely to the quiet, ancient dark. The traveler did not turn back, nor did they look forward. They simply moved, accepting the slow erasure of all things. The mist was the world now, and the world was the mist. It seeped into the silence, making the silence itself heavy and wet. The air carried the constant, low pressure of great submerged depths. To breathe here was to breathe the patience of stones and the slow cessation of memory. The traveler felt the cold dampness on the face, a sensation both isolating and utterly familiar, like touching one's own forgotten reflection. It was the veil between the known and the necessary. With every slow, deliberate step, the traveler observed the texture of the gray. It was not uniform. It flowed in slow, languid currents, shifting from the silver white of spun silk near the ground to the deep, bruise-colored shadows above, where the heavy roof of the sky pressed down, absolute and unmoving. This gray was the color of unremembered things, of stories told so long ago they became the truth of the air. There was a continuous, subtle hush in the air, the sound of the mist moving against itself, a collective, drawn-out sigh. It was the sound of the village not existing, the sound of the world taking back its form. The quiet was so deep that the traveler could hear the soft, internal, rhythmic thump of their own heart, a gentle insistence in the endless calm. This sound, too, seemed to slow, synchronize, and settle into the pace of the receding land. The traveler imagined the heavy, deep stones of the cottages, now entirely submerged in the mist, dissolving like sugar in tea, not violently, not with noise, but with quiet, profound geological slowness. The thick slate roofs, designed to withstand centuries, were now merely shadows, fading ideas of shelter. The small, deep-set windows, which had glowed with that soft, bruised orange light, were dark now, their light extinguished not by a hand, but by the cessation of need. The inner warmth was gone, and the dark was welcome. The sensation of the earth beneath the traveler's feet was changing again. It was no longer the densely trodden path of the village, but something softer, yielding, less defined. It was raw earth, undisturbed, anciently cool, and entirely wet. The traveler's foot sank slightly, gently, without fuss or resistance. This ground was older than the village, older than memory, the eternal bed upon which the temporary illusion of shelter was permitted to rest each night. There was a faint, low sound now, apart from the chime, but just as distant and quiet. It was the sound of very slow running water,
Not a torrent, not a bubbling brook, but a languid, unhurried flow, seeking the lowest point with infinite patience. It was the sound of indifference, the sound of time passing, not in ticks, but in the soft, continuous attrition of stone. The traveler paused, listening, finding comfort in the indifference. The sound offered no urgency, only persistence.
The air grew cleaner now, losing the last vestiges of the ancient woodsmoke. The smell of wet earth was paramount, elemental, comforting in its absolute finality. The only other scent was the metallic, cool scent of the mist itself, the breath of the great, quiet night. The traveler drew a deep, slow breath, holding the coolness in the chest, letting it flow out without hurry. The act of breathing became a focus, a quiet meditation in the receding dark. The traveler remembered the slow movements of the woman by the hearth, the way her hand had lifted, the precise, unhurried arc of the gesture, pointing not at the visitor, but at the space reserved for rest. That moment was an eternal fact within the vanishing village. It was the quiet, absolute acceptance of presence. It required no words, no exchange, only the mutual agreement that for a time, in that place, rest was the only truth. The heavy woolen blanket placed on the bench, rough against the fingertips, smelling of lavender and long storage, that too was a truth that vanished yet endured. The comfort was not fleeting, it was simply absorbed back into the silence, an act of rest completed and sealed within the night.
The traveler felt the ghost of that warmth on the skin, a phantom sensation of shelter that eased the chest and quieted the mind. The path the traveler now followed was only marginally distinct from the fog itself. It was a slight change in the texture of the ground, a fractionally denser compression of the soil, enough to guide the foot without demanding attention. The traveler did not consciously follow the path merely allowed itself to be trod. It was the route of inevitability, leading neither toward nor away, but simply through. The shapes of the cottages were long gone. The traveler was surrounded by formless, continuous gray. If one were to reach out, the hand would meet only the dense, cool, fluid air. Yet the traveler knew the precise location of the heavy slate roofs, the thick stone walls, the smooth wooden door left ajar. These facts existed not as structures, but as memories of placement, held perfectly within the fabric of the mist itself. The village was not destroyed, it was held in a profound, necessary suspension. The sound of the slow, distant, silvery chime began to return, weaving itself back into the fabric of the silence.
It was softer now, farther. Perhaps not a bell at all, but the very sound of the slow, cool wind turning upon itself in the vast, hollow chamber of the night. It faded, then returned, a gentle, continuous pulse that encouraged the traveler to slow down, to yield, to not strive against the profound quietude. The traveler stopped. There was no longer any difference between the air and the ground. All was continuous, cool, yielding, gray. The steps had ceased, not out of exhaustion, but out of recognition that the walking was over. The journey had reached its necessary soft conclusion. To stand here was to be perfectly still, perfectly quiet, suspended between the moments. The traveler did not feel fear or loneliness. This was the place that existed between moments, between days, between breaths. It was the sanctuary of the unseen, where identity dissolved and belonging was the only state. The body felt heavy, wonderfully heavy, settled and grounded in the deep, constant rhythm of the earth beneath the mist. The great silence was a vast, soft cradle.
The traveler allowed the body to yield, to sink into the heavy stillness.
The eyes were open, but they saw only the unchanging, comforting gray. The mind, too, began to soften, its thoughts becoming slow, heavy, repetitive echoes of the silence itself. Rest, quiet, stay, belong. These were the only words, and they were silent, internal, gentle. The mist moved closer, wrapping the traveler entirely. It was a final, soft embrace, a complete absorption into the night. The distinction between the traveler and the surrounding gray dissolved. The traveler was simply an enduring part of the profound stillness, a shadow held within the larger dark. The profound, certain knowledge settled. The night was the shelter, the deep, dark, ancient shelter, and the only true action was to cease striving, to close the eyes, and finally, gently belong entirely to the quiet, ancient dark. The heavy breathing of the night settled over everything. The rhythm of the world slowed, 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 until it was only the quiet, even pulse of rest. The chimes faded, the water sound faded, the internal heart sound faded. There was only the great, encompassing, perfect, and necessary silence. Sleep was not a sudden fall, but a final, gentle sinking. The mind let go of the last fragile thread of waking thought, surrendering to the vast, velvet dark, knowing that the village, held in suspension, would return, and the traveler, held in the quiet, was already home. Sleep, rest, quiet.